Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another HM1 in 2021. Today I'm going to be going over Opnav instruction 6100.3 alpha, change transmittal 1 off the HM1 advancement bib. So this one is all about the deployment health assessment process. Before I really get into it, honestly, I've seen this many times. I think the most important thing to know from this entire instruction, if there was one thing you picked up and forgot everything else, it would be what are the three parts of the deployment health assessment, and what are the timelines, and where does that data go to. I think that is the most important stuff for us to understand, especially in healthcare, to understand what do we do with people, because it's basically physical exams for people that went on deployment. So it talks here, the change from middle just says that the timeline changed in the instruction, but we'll touch that when we get into it. So again, it's all about that deployment health assessment for active duty and reserve service members, and the reporting compliance of this goes directly to CNO. So Chief of Naval Operations, so process of reporting compliance to the CNO. Let's see, it is what you'd imagine it would be. It's all about the deployment health assessments. Here are the three forms. So 2795, 2796, and 2900. So the 2795 is the pre-deployment health assessment, so that happens before you deploy. The 2796 is the post-deployment, so that's after you come home. And then 2900 is the one that happens a few months after the post-deployment. The reason that the instruction gives for that new, because the 2900 is new off the change transmittal, it's basically to cover that people feel worse several months after returning from deployment as opposed to when they do immediately coming back. So maybe it's just the adrenaline of coming back home. A couple months after that is where typically people start to feel worse after coming back. So the 2900, the whole point of that is to kind of capture that, hey, let's give it a few months. How are you doing now? What services do you need, and how can we help you? So let's define a deployment. The relocation of forces and material to a desired operational area. It's typically limited to periods of greater than 30 days. So it needs to be 30 days or more to be considered a deployment. Redeployment is when the person goes back home. Let's see. And then it just kind of talks more about what deployment means. So the assessment is reviewed and certified by a healthcare provider. What I thought was interesting about the deployment health is it's not specifically a physician. It can be a physician, a PA, an NP, an advanced practice nurse, an IDC, and an independent duty med tech, or special forces master sergeant. So it's not specific to a doctor that has to do it. Let's see. So let's look at so here are the timelines. So the 2795, which if we scroll up, the 2795 is the pre-deployment. That happens 120 days prior to the expected deployment date. So a quarter earlier. So just think pre 120 days. The 2796, so that's your post-deployment, so when you get back, is close to the redeployment day as possible, so as close to coming home, but not earlier than 30 days before or later than 30 days after. So you can do it before you even get back. It just can't be any earlier than 30 days of that. So you essentially have a 60-day window, 30 before, 30 after. And then the 2900, that is 90 to 180 days. I think it may be important to spend some time either flashcarding or just thinking about these these timelines, because it's not the same across the board. So I'll probably think of it needs to happen a quarter earlier. So no more than a quarter earlier, because 4 months, 120 days. Or actually, no, a quarter is 3 months. A third. So just think 120 days. So 120 days before, 30 after. So either 30 before or 30 after. Or 3 months to 6 months after that redeployment. And then it does caveat. So people that deploy for more than one 30-day period in 12 months, they actually receive the PDHRA concurrent with their annual PHA. So the PDHRA is that post-deployment reassessment. So PDHRA, don't forget your acronyms. So again, if they're underway, a lot of times 30 days, that will just happen during their PHA. Let's see. So if there's wounds or injuries, they need to have the reassessment conducted 90 to 180 days after returning to the home station. I think this paragraph doesn't really make sense to me because it says earlier everyone should, but I guess this is the must. Because if you look up here, it says shall be 90 to 100. If they have injuries, it must be done from 90 to 180. So turn that shall into a must. Let's see. So if you're separating from active duty before that 90 to 180 day window, there needs to be a concurrent and separating health assessment. So, and if they're drilling, they still have to do it in the same timeline. Nothing changes. So if you're getting out, that information is going to be captured on your concurrent PDHRA and also your separation stuff. So you can't do your prims if you are delinquent on your 2796 or your 2900. So, I mean, now I guess maybe not as big of a deal because PRTs are canceled, but they're coming back at the end of this year. So, yeah, if you mess up by not getting someone's PDHRA or the post-deployment, you basically made it so they can't take the PRT, and that really will mess with their career. So deployment health assessments are completed electronically to the Navy Marine Corps Public Health Center, so the NMCPHC. And yeah, that's really, in my opinion, I think that's the most important part of this instruction. But just to be thorough, I'm going to talk about some of like the roles and responsibilities, which is like the second half of this instruction. But I would say if you were to read the first 5 minutes of this and really commit it to memory, I would say those form numbers and those timelines. So roles and responsibilities. So CNO is the boss. They need to develop and maintain the deployment health assessment. They need to provide, or the deputy CNO, provide quarterly compliance reports to the CNO themselves. Management is done in MERS. You should know MERS by now. The Commander Fleet Forces Command. They're the ones that develop that guidance to ensure that people are briefed on their deployment health threats. So are you going to a malaria area? What stuff you need to be scared about, or not scared, but prepared for? And that's really the Commander Fleet Forces Command. That is their job, to look at guidance for safety stuff and what's going on. BUMED. They're the ones that make sure there's healthcare doing it. That's kind of what those 5 bullets say. Operational commands are going to use MERS to make sure people are up to date on their stuff. So Echelon 2, I noticed that the organizational chart isn't on the bibs this year, but Echelon 2 is, I think, regional. So NavMed West, NavMed East, and then the third one that I think changed recently, but I'd have to look at the instruction when it's on my advancement exam, because my goal right now is just the advancement study stuff. So Echelon 2 is region. They submit monthly reports to the Fleet Forces Command, so the Commander of Fleet Forces Command. They get their monthly reports from their Echelon 2 regional folks. And then COs. COs need to make sure that their service members are being briefed on deployment threats, so they're the ones that are actually making sure people are aware. And they're going to be the ones that make sure those timelines are adhered to. So see, look. This is the 3rd time these timelines have been mentioned in this instruction. So make sure that service members complete that pre-deployment within 120 days. Make sure they complete the post-deployment 30 days before or after. And also make sure that PDHRA, the post-deployment health reassessment, is done between 90 and 180 days after deployment. And it does say that there is a PDHRA call center, because you saw earlier, like, this can mess with your prims and your PRT. So yeah, they got a contingency. If you're stationed remotely, you can just hit up this call center line to get taken care of. Let's see. It looks like reserves are done through the NOSC or calling that PDHRA center, and that's really the big one. Let's see. NMPS. Not sure what that acronym is. I'll read through this one again. I'll put it in the comments. They just need to make sure everyone has it. IA folk also complete it. Their post. And that's really it. Training stuff is use MERS. Forms and reports. See, like there it is again. The 2795, 2796, 2900. Glossary just defines a lot of the terms. I know the big one that just piqued my interest was the what is a provider defined as in this instruction. Something tells me that's important to try to just remember it's not just a physician, because I could see how that could be an easy advancement trick where it's like, duh, this one's obviously the physician, but it's not the right answer. All right, and that's it for OpNav instruction 6100.3 Charlie. That is the deployment health assessment process. All right, have a good night, everybody.